And we are back with Aura the Generous. Oh god, I am so happy. Well, let's not waste any more time on lingering and let's get into another amazing bio. Actions she will always be remembered as the loving and kind queen her people appreciated. The Generous. Born 11:24 a.m., died 11:73 a.m. Was queen 11:41 a.m. to 11:67 a.m. Married to Spruce Forest. Children: Estelina butterfly, red giant butterfly, ecliptic butterfly, crater butterfly, and Juanina butterfly. Queen Panatia gave birth to her first heiress on the 28th day of corn in the year 1124. A princess with pink shells for her cheek emblems and violet hair and pink eyes of her father, Alaric Flowers. The humor of everyone in the room was so jovial upon the birth that Planitia decided to name her Aura, her happiness and emotions always affecting those around her. Even the infant princess herself seemed to have been born in a good mood. Lady Bailey Banner reports that Her Royal Highness's attempted cries were quiet and sparse. If that doesn't convey happiness, I don't know what does. However, Aura's abnormal, low-pitched cry wasn't exactly indicative of joy, being instead a reason for the worry of her parents and an immediate shift in the mood of the room. Following a close examination by Lady Fabrice Cross, Aura was revealed to have been born with a defective larynx and damaged vocal cords, resulting in an inability to produce sounds. In other words, the princess was mute, a condition which many believed to have been linked to her mother's remaining hybrid genealogy. That being said, Aura's early childhood years were spent under the watchful eye of her mother Planitia. Her added slight difficulties of amber, resulting in frequent tumbles, only increased Planitia's protection around her, to the point the castle servants were instructed to never leave the princess alone. Regardless, before we further delve into the story, I feel necessary to clear up a historical inaccuracy that even the most esteemed historians tend to commit. This being the misconception that, due to her muteness, Aura was completely incapable of communicating or making her ideas and beliefs known, which wasn't at all true. Whenever she quickly wanted to get someone's attention, the princess would click her tongue on the roof of her mouth or raise her arms until noticed. And after learning to write, she would carry around a notebook to communicate with others. Yet by far the most effective way Aura made herself understood was through the use of sign language. Royal family and castle staff alike learned to use this system of communication to better interpret what message the princess wanted to convey, thus facilitating Aura's engagement in conversations and providing the princess with a much-needed sense of normalcy and belonging. With that issue out of the way, Aura was described as a sweet and simple, extremely empathetic little girl who had a heart of gold and was always seen smiling. She had a charming, innocent, and immaculate worldview, believing everyone had good in their hearts and doing her best to bring it out. On the other hand, she was quite gullible and naive, her tendency to see the best in and help people at times proving more of a weakness rather than a strength. Anyone who thinks Aura's affable personality helped her mingling with her peers is wrong. The remaining nobility seemed uninterested in befriending her and kept her at arm's length. Queen Panatia's insistent monarch... I cannot speak. Hold on, let me take a second to breathe. Queen Planetia's insistent monitoring of her daughter certainly not helping Aura's case. However, contrary to the information that reaches us nowadays, this wasn't due to some malice by the young noble youths. The rumors that the princess was shunned and made fun of due to her chubbier figure, potato nose, or even own muteness being strictly fabricated and likely a product of some bad tongues thought throughout the ages. In reality, the other children didn't engage with Aura simply because they lacked the patience to try to understand her, which, given their youthful impulsivity and restlessness, couldn't really be blamed. Anyway, the queen's concern with Aura would ease for a few months due to the birth of her sister Cartia and the consequent need of attention in 1126, before returning even more intensively months later after a fall made the princess chip a tooth on the corner of her nightstand. Even with the false rumors that it led Princess Cartia to hold a grudge against Aura, the two sisters were incredibly close and played together nearly every day, with Aura regularly lending or even giving her toys to Cartia in order to see her happy. In fact, their bond was so intimate that Aura often acted as an accomplice to Cartia's adventurous personality, providing key distractions that allowed her younger sister to sneak away and explore the world beyond castle walls. Nevertheless, whenever her sister wasn't around, Aura found herself in the company of the servants of Butterfly Castle, listening to their stories and making time for their concerns. Moreover, perhaps due to some subconscious desire to feel useful and help others in spite of her muteness, Aura was constantly seen aiding castle staff in their chores and altruistic pursuit, which in time grew to include donating her old clothes and remains of banquets to the poorest. Mama taught me to share and be fair. I think I'd only be just to give what I have to too much to those who have too little. The princess would gesture every time someone questioned her donation. During the tournament of 1132, after much insistence, Aura finally convinced her mother to step out of the castle walls for a day and stroll to the fair freely for the first time. In reality, Aura intended to directly hand out donations to her people, something which Panatia had always limited and forbade her from doing in person, during which she briefly saw a green-haired boy dressed in a hood, also distributing bread and soup amongst the commoners. Although no words were exchanged, the boy immediately won the princess's heart with his solidarity and gentle smile. After finishing her donations and preparing to return to the castle, Aura accidentally bumped into someone when crossing the corner of a stall, both parties falling on the ground and startled by their collision. However, upon reopening her eyes, Aura was surprised to see herself. In her journal, the princess recounts the experience. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. It was like looking in a mirror. Everything I did, the other me perfectly mimicked, be it gesturing, making a funny face, pretending to walk away, and then suddenly turn back. For a second there, I actually believed it was my reflection, and then she spooked me and I fell again. The other girl giggled as she offered Aura a hand and a rag to clean her face, joking that someone that good-looking shouldn't be hiding her beauty. However, as Aura scrubbed her mud-covered cheek marks, the girl's eyes immediately widened as she bowed and apologized for her clumsiness, a gesture which the princess was quick to dismiss and forgive. It was this motion that seemed to give the girl some ease around Aura, as following a brief moment of gushing over having found a doppelganger, she went back to her previous humor, proceeding to answer all of the princess's questions before Aura could even think of them. She told me that her name was Arua, and that she had been living in a moth house ever since her mother died when she was very young. Apparently, she was being raised as a future moth impersonating me, but neither me nor her ever imagined the resemblance would be so uncanny. Our conversation was unfortunately cut short after I heard a group of knights calling out my name, but I sincerely hoped this wasn't the last time I saw of my doppelganger, Aura further described in her diary. Luckily, Aura didn't have to wait long to see her again, as by occasion of her 8th birthday and proximity to St. Star's Day, the princess was given the right to organize a mass donation from the capital gates. Not only did it allow her to recognize the compassionate green-haired boy now dressed in forest colors, volunteering alongside her, it also provided the perfect opportunity for Aura to pull her aside while everyone was distracted and further bond. It was a pleasant conversation, the girl being the first around her age to actually show interest and listen to what Aura had to say. This included her desire to escape her mother's surveillance and freely help the people without worrying she would be caught, something that sparked an idea in her doppelganger's mind. They swapped places, the pauper covering for the princess while the latter fulfilled her dream. Grinning with excitement, Aura shook on it with her double arranging the details of their first switch before the princess was called back to the castle. Said substitution took place weeks later, already in 1133, a carefully chosen day when Queen Planetia would be occupied all day at Flower's capital, under the pretext of going to the stables to check on her mother's stallion. Aura met Oruba in secret, the peasant girl already waiting for her donning a cloak. After swapping attires, and the princess drew her shell cheek marks on her doppelganger's face, while covering her own with mud, Arua asked one last time if Aura was sure she wanted to do this, to which the princess replied by nodding her head vigorously yes with a determined face. She then hugged her friend goodbye, departing to town carrying a basket of supplies. Regarding her first day as a commoner, Aura had this to say in her journal. It was scary at first. A lot of new faces and words I never heard before. People treating me like, well, normal. How exciting. But the thing that shocked me the most was seeing the true extent of the conditions of my people are living in. Dirt everywhere, rubbish piling on the sidewalks, homeless peasants on almost every corner. It seems all the new citizens from my mother's reign weren't all benefits. I wondered if she is even aware of this overpopulation issue. Whatever the case, more than ever, I am certain that what I'm doing is the right thing. These people need help, and while I'm not a queen, this is the best I can do. It may not be much, but I hope it's enough to bring some light into their lives. I pray to Celestia my mother doesn't find out. I can only imagine her reaction. Aura and Orua would go on to switch places frequently throughout the next few years, sometimes even more than once in the same week, growing closer with each time they met to the point Aura considered her doppelganger to be her close best friend. She even taught her some sign language, which in return Orua would design the safest routes to keep the princess away from zones and people she considered not so friendly. But Glossaric, you say Aura and Orua are two completely different people. Did no one ever find out she was being impersonated? And to that I answer, well, yes, but actually no. The only other person aware of this swap was Princess Quartia, who vowed to keep it secret, excited that her older sister was finally breaking the rules. Moreover, it was Quartaria who offered Orua some guidance on how to behave more like Princess Aura, the doppelganger's sassier and more assertive and outspoken personality being able to go unnoticed by those in the castle, even with her lack of speaking. Nevertheless, Arua wasn't the only relationship Aura forged thanks to her escapades. As fate would have it, the princess crossed paths with the charitable forest boy practically every time during her outings, resulting in an intimate friendship blooming between them. She found out that the lad was Lady Fig's youngest out of 8 children, Spruce Forest, trying to make a difference among his brothers by helping those in need. While his parents never placed him in the circle that was to interact with Aura due to his younger age, the boy revealed he had learned sign language in hopes of meeting her someday. And as their bond evolved, Spruce proved to be one of the only people who truly understand Aura, or had the time and patience their peers lacked for her. It is said he sometimes didn't even need words to interpret her. In time, Spruce came to intertwine his visits with those of the princesses looking to spend more time in her company, in addition to protect Aura from any harm her docile nature drew to her. Finally, in 1138, Aura turned 14 and was given possession of the royal magic wand. Yet the gift that surprised her the most was a kiss from Spruce. The princess reportedly being so enthusiastic, her feelings were reciprocated. She had no problem in dragging the blushing boy to meet her parents, thus unintentionally officializing their relationship. About her magic, it is important to yet again clear up another misunderstanding scholars often make when characterizing Aura's time with the wand, that she was unable to use it due to her muteness. It was something that the nobility had feared at the time and attempted to use as grounds for Queen Planitia to replace Aura, but to no avail. While it is true that the princess didn't perform spells in the traditional way her ancestors did, as we had seen with her great-grandmother Sonia, a spoken instruction wasn't necessarily required when working with magic. As such, Aura spells were mostly based on movement and dynamic cues, with the occasional writing their names or incantations in the air when such strategy proved unviable, such as with the all-seeing eye spell. That being said, Aura's studies were rather underwhelming. She had a great potential and was perfectly capable of performing the spells of the previous queens with little to no difficulty. And when it came to her own enchantments, Aura's accomplishments were quite lacking, almost as if she was afraid of her magic would hurt someone the more she evolved it. Most of her spells are harmless, cute, and cuddly, such as the mirror transmogrification to improve Rua's disguise of herself, or the floaty conch reef for summoning a giant seashell to help transport the supplies for her donations. Regardless, the all-seeing eye had a reason for its mention. It became essential during Aura's escapades for establishing a link with Orua back at the palace, allowing the girls to get a better picture of what the other was doing and communicate any setbacks. Inadvertently, this was what ultimately led to the downfall of her secret. One night in 1140, being caught by surprise by a storm after a long day of offerings, Aura heard Mewni's bells ringing at midnight and figured it was far too late and unsafe for her to return to the castle. She contacted Orua, informing her of her decision to spend the night with Spruce at a nearby shelter, in return allowing her best friend to sleep in her bed and hide from the storm for the night. The princess returned to the castle the following morning before the first rays of dawn broke through the horizon, hoping to arrive unnoticed and smoothly switch back. However, just as she arrived at the stables, Aura was forced to face herself, quite literally, as waiting for her was Orua accompanied by a not-so-satisfied Queen Planitia. Calm and collected, Planitia began by commenting on how she didn't remember giving birth to twins, before smudging Orua's fake cheek marks and revealing she had always known about the princess's deceptions, but hoped Aura would naturally confess without having to resort to confrontation. And as if your dishonesty and own endangerment with these escapades weren't enough, when you decided to put a complete stranger sleeping among our family's walls and compromise our safety, that is where I draw the line to your antics, young lady. Her mother scolded her as Aura bowed her head in shame. However, before Planitia could announce any punishment, she was stopped by Orua, who stood up to the queen in Aura's name. Your Majesty, your daughter has done nothing wrong. Your people, we are living in a terrible condition, and while the queen may not be aware, the princess certainly is. All Aura was trying to do was help people, like she always does. Some queen of justice you'd be if you punished someone for doing the right thing. If someone has to face the consequences, let it be me. It was my idea after all. Ora expected her mother to rebuke Arua's impertinence. God. Sorry, y'all. I'm sorry. I can't say that. Impertinence. Let's just finish like that. But to her surprise, after a few moments of silence, Infinitia smiled with a certain contentment, nodding with approval as she replied, "I'm not yet blind enough to see when I'm wrong, or that this girl speaks the truth, and it's not afraid to do so. I believe you need someone like her to guide you in life, so look out for you, protect you when I'm no longer around. I hereby decree Arua shall henceforth be your lady-in-waiting. She has earned her place inside the castle walls by your side. You have a gift to bring out the best in people, Ora. So let me make this my gift to you. All I ask in return is that there are no more secrets." No more secrets were there indeed. At the following months, the Planitia allowed Ora to freely help the commoners, trusting Arua would keep her daughter from donating the whole castle, in her words. However, only as long as the princess in return kept track of her royal duties, with which Ora could count on her lady-in-waiting's help to update her on any developments during her absence. Mother and daughter even worked together to create measures that would help the poorest, which few knew the queen was to implement were it not for the tragedy that fell upon the royal family later that year. At the end of 1140, Queen Planitia became completely blind following what many believed to have been an accident during a trial. Even with her blindness, it's reported the queen refused to admit her governing capabilities had been affected in any way. Despite now undeniably requiring some assistance to perform her royal affairs, this aid was frequently provided by Ora herself, who temporarily halted her visits to the town in order to fully devote herself to her mother's care and prioritize her health. 6 months passed under a blind queen butterfly, a period which would have likely lasted longer had it not been for Ora's initiative. Feeling sufficiently prepared to assume the throne after shadowing her mother, Ora, many say thanks to Arua's influence, wrote her a long letter convincing the queen to abdicate, making her realize she was no longer in fit condition to properly govern and assuring her she was ready to assume the duties. A curious fact is that due to Ora's muteness and Planetia's blindness, the letter was read out loud by Arua, many saying it was the girl's tone that further got the queen to relinquish her position. The coronation ceremony was held the following month, a modest event remarkably accessible to her people, with Ora even dedicating some of her time to directly interact with them. Some rumors say that the new queen had supposedly hidden some corn in her skirts to hand out to her people. However, there isn't any substantial evidence that would suggest they are anything more than urban legends. Ora's crown. Although Ora was pressured to advance with a wedding to Spruce, something which she revealed some nervousness about, the forest boy told her there was no need to rush things, both deciding to give it more time before announcing any engagement. An endearing and considerate princess, Ora was an equally kind and selfless queen, known for her benevolence and deep care for her subjects. That being said, when discussing the reign of Mewni's first mute queen, there is a tendency to incorrectly assume it was characterized by a spineless monarch too nice to make the difficult choices, at times conjured with the also inaccurate belief that Ora's muteness denied her from communicating with her council, resulting in anarchy and anarchic disobedience from them. Nonetheless, as we've established before, this conception wouldn't be farther from the truth. In part thanks to Aura's use of sign language or occasional magic to display her ideas during meetings in a manner reminiscent of Queen Celia's the Harmonious's famous imagery projection spells. As for her reign itself, it wasn't unruly at all. Aura surprisingly held her ground against her ministers, often opposing ideas which some historians theorize was thanks to Orua's influence and direction. Her former lady-in-waiting was promoted to first royal advisor and translator in one of Aura's first official acts, acting as the princess's voice of reason while simultaneously giving her a perspective on the people. Orua not only prevented Aura from falling victim to any scam or disingenuous choice, but also kept her from going overboard with her generosity and implying the kingdom's safes. The full extent of Orua's involvement of the royal affairs remains unknown to this date. Some saying she was behind all of Orua's decisions and the one really in charge of the kingdom. Whether it corresponds to the truth or not, we may never know. In any case, there's a consensus that Aura's reign had been greatly turned to the people. She got to work less than a month after being crowned, managing to win over her council support to direct a greater slice of the yearly budget towards improving her subjects' quality of life by playing with the idea that happier subjects are more willing to pay higher taxes. With her ministers' approval, Aura finally finished establishing the measures that had been thwarted by Planetia's illness, which, although definitely more bureaucratic than she would have liked, were undeniably as pivotal as to her vision. First, Aura created the Universal Credit, which provided homeless or unemployed people with a monthly allowance to cover their needs. Shortly after, she introduced the Minimum Income Law, which, as the name suggests, established the lowest possible salary any worker was to receive. Additionally, Aura made known a decree that protected workers with deficiencies from being unfairly dismissed, besides providing them with financial aid in case they were unemployed, seen as an extension of the Universal Credit. And finally, she tightened the child labor laws, while also making available yearly Elfin Door scholarships and student loans that were to provide less fortunate students access to higher education under the Crown's name. Furthermore, her first year of reign had been greatly dedicated to overhauling the kingdom in favor of making it more accessible to people with handicaps, such as installing ramps on every public building, including braille on every major document, providing sidewalks with tactile paving, and spreading the use of sign language, most prominently during important announcements or public broadcasts. In 1143, after years of planning, Aura opened several homeless shelters in the most densely populated areas to further care for her poorer subjects, which also doubled as storm shelters in the event of severe weather. Moreover, she ordered the construction of several low-rent neighborhoods supported by the Crown, officially prohibited hostile architecture and clean streets. I cannot speak. Why? Cleanse the streets of all part of her goal to restore her people's life conditions affected by the population expansion. The homeless shelters were often the stage to soup kitchens and public donations, both also Aura's initiatives, which the Queen herself was a part of, and was at times even seen taking the time to comfort individual attendees in person. On that note, against all odds, Queen Aura never stopped participating in charity events and being seen in public, helping her subjects. Despite her busy schedule, going as far as creating weekly hearings to directly hear and take suggestions from them. She still holds the record for the monarch with the most volunteer work, visits, and donations to public institutions, even coming to join the Queen's wings in late 1143 alongside her sister Quartaria, this latter being more present in the battlefields, while Aura mainly stuck to the infirmaries. The fondness Butterfly's subjects already had for Aura was then spread to other kingdoms, bringing back cooperative spirit between realms unseen since Queen Celia. To this day, there are those who believe that there were two Queen Auras, or that at the very least Aura had lived a double life in order to balance her regal and charitable work. She could almost be seen in two places at once, first attending a council meeting in the palace, followed by, mere minutes later, handing out cornbread in the streets across town. It led to some speculate that Aura had been leaving Orua in her place to handle the entire political side of her life, if she hadn't been doing so already, while she personally took care of the humanitarian one, explaining how she impossibly had time for both. Said theory could be supported by the fact that, according to her council, there were days where Aura was much more authoritative. I'm not even into that. The decisive queen, which could just as easily be attributed to gain experience and confidence, and the suspicion that Aura had been faking her muteness, which are as valid as her mother pretending her blindness, certainly play into this argument, as well as most likely stemming from the occasional slip-up by Orua as Aura. In any case, neither, understandably, ever gave any satisfaction regarding this matter, the truth hardly ever being known and remaining one of the most popular conspiracy theories among the tin-foil hats. At any rate, Aura's involvement with the Queen's wings peaked in 1144, shortly after extending its reach to 8 other dimensions, which led to the adoption of its current name, the Butterfly Wings. Aura was surprised by a crowd of about 2,500 non-human individuals standing outside the castle's doors. Some of her ministers had told her to ignore them and they just go away, to which Aura, quite bothered, signed that pretending a problem doesn't exist won't make it disappear. She agreed to meet with their spokesperson, especially after seeing that the mob was mostly composed of simple, modest people, including women and young children, much reminding her of her own subjects. Aura learned that they were the original inhabitants, or what was left of them, from the null dimension, humble farmers who lived in peace and isolation until the multiverse's most dangerous felons began to be released in their realm. A place then thought to be uninhabited. Unsurprisingly, the prisoners proceeded to pursue and kill all the natives they found, forcing the farmers to leave their home behind in search of a new, safer one. They hoped to find one in the Kingdom Butterfly, hearing of Aura's benevolence across dimensions. Filled with compassion, the Queen ignored her council's hesitations and decided to take in any and all refugees from the null dimension. She ordered the extension of her homeless shelters and make for their temporary housing while they adjusted to their new realm, providing them with all the support they required in the meantime. Anyway, perhaps what her vassals were trying to avoid word of Aura's friendliness towards foreigners spread like wildfire. More and more people were attracted to her lands, seeking refuge for various reasons, from succession wars in Pixtopia to violent guerrillas in the Candy Dimension. Aura was incapable of refusing assistance to any who came to her door, truly turning the kingdom to a safe haven for refugees during her reign. It ultimately resulted in a second population increase, which, needless to say, was much better handled than the one in her mother's reign. Furthermore, with Aura's efforts to properly include her newest subjects in society, it resulted in more jobs and working population that boosted the kingdom's exports and economy, practically negating the crown's expenses for accommodating the new citizens and quietly the nobility's reluctance to accept them. In the midst of this hectic period, Aura announced her engagement to Spruce in 1145, which happened in the most curious way. After catching the flower bouquet at her sister's wedding to Garnet Stone, Aura was consequently reminded that she hadn't married yet, immediately proposing to her beloved. Even most interestingly, she did it at the same time Spruce turned to her with the same question, having also forgotten about it between his own charity events and volunteer actions. Anyway, Aura Butterfly and Spruce Forest were married months later at the Great Celestum, the ceremony being noteworthy for not only its humble setting, as expected from Queen Aura, but also for being the only royal wedding where the vows were exchanged exclusively in sign language. Weeks after returning from her honeymoon, Aura reported she was expecting her first child, whom she gave birth to in 1146. Yet, as she looked outside the window, Aura noticed only the morning star glowed lonely in the night sky, announcing the end of the Golden Ages, and the beginning of a new era under her daughter, a Star Queen. For this reason, Aura named her heiress as Selena, Starshine in High Mewnian language. In light of the conversation surrounding it, Aura's behavior as a mother will be covered in the biography of Queen Selena, but many to this day believe that she is indirectly responsible for the age that her daughter would open. While motherhood prevented Aura from carrying as many visits as to her subjects as she would have liked to, it also provided her with the perfect opportunity to implement more changes she had long been developing into the kingdom. Days after returning to the royal office, Aura approved the bill that was to extend the parental leave of both new mothers and fathers, while also providing families with some financial benefits to support their children. The following year, she opened the St. Aura's Orphanage, and 1148 would see her final two projects come to fruition: the first royal lottery and the charity market, both of which are still held nowadays. In 1149, Aura announced her second pregnancy, happy news that was sadly overshadowed by Queen Mother Planetia's sudden death, following a heart attack caused by years of stress from her duties. A loss greatly complicated the gestation of her child, resulting in an equally as arduous labor that culminated with the birth of a boy whose life was only saved thanks to Lord Alan Cross's medical expertise, Prince Red Giant Planetio Butterfly. The news of her mother's passing echoed through dimensions, with Aura receiving dozens of condolences, letters, and parting gifts from other realms, which many believed to be retribution for her previous help and generosity. Regardless, the most prominent offering by far had originated from Pixtopia, a rare amber crystal that had recently been mined and was thought to belong to the same family as the Tremorphidian. Yet, a close inspection by Lady Garnet revealed that when hit by light, the crystal emitted an amber beam, which, just like the golden vision spell, compelled all those illuminated by it to tell the truth. With the cracks of the Veroso having already been shown and the box of truth proving rather dangerous, Aura thought of a way to not only fix the problem, but also honor her mother's legacy. The crystal that became known as the Amber Light was broken into several shards, which were then incorporated into busts of Saint Planitia. These statues were subsequently supplied to all courtrooms in the realm. In a way, Aura, having Queen Planetia's infallible vision to be present in every trial. In 1151, Aura gave birth to her third child, Prince Ecliptic. 3 years later, Prince Crater was born, and finally, in 1156, the youngest came to Mewni, Princess Wanina. However, later that year, King Father Alaric passed away due to an allergic reaction of unknown cause. With Wanina's birth comes a question that continues to trouble historians nowadays. Now that she had another daughter and a candidate for an heiress, why did Queen Aura never replace Princess Estelina due to her already problematic behavior and never-ending complaints from servants regarding the princess's attitude, especially preventing the future that was to come? While some say it was because Aura was afraid that preventing a Star Queen from ruling was going against Celestia's will, others claim that, taking into account the Queen's positive and goodwill, Aura fundamentally considered Princess Estelina had good within her and just needed more time to show it, even citing Queen Astra as a good example. This or the fact that Aura possibly didn't want Estelina to feel her own mother had given up on her and didn't believe in her. Whatever the case, what matters is that Aura remained ever hopeful and passed the wand to Estelina in 1160. And for a while, it seemed her faith in her daughter had been well placed, as Estelina began showing interest in council meetings and learning about the responsibilities of being a queen. Aura and the ministers took it as a sign of promising reign. Her daughter's insistence to help with her royal duties, namely representing Aura in assemblies and handling some of the minor paperwork, finally granting the queen the time she had lacked since becoming a mother to once again more actively participate in soup kitchens and directly interact with her subjects. However, this opinion will start to change. It starts to change by 1162, constantly surrounded by the babbling atmosphere of the town. Over time, the queen came to be aware of the people's perception of the princess, and that it wasn't exactly a positive one. Stories of Estelina's rudeness towards her subjects and hidden bad genius overwhelmed the streets, and those servants, several rumors and whispers. Aura learned of the bad omens surrounding her daughter's future. Many elders alluded to the princess's cheek marks as symbols of chaos, believing the kingdom would end in ruin under her rule. Although Aura didn't want to believe the rumors about her daughter, the truth is that they made her somewhat uneasy, even if she didn't want to admit it. She still held hope for Estelina, but at the same time became concerned about the kingdom's future with her daughter. Looking to conciliate this situation without taking any sides, Aura slowly began pulling back on the princess's input in royal affairs, finding excuses to pass them on to Arua, who had always opposed her daughter's involvement, and hoping Estelina wouldn't take notice of her intention to keep her away from the throne. This and her secret resolution to hold the crown for as long as she could was what the queen hoped would give Princess Estelina enough time to come around and mature into the person Aura still believed she could be. Aura stood strongly by this decision, evident by her withdrawal from announcing any intention to abdicate despite her daughter's constant hints. Not even Estelina's engagement to Vulture Redbird, whom Aura was never much fond of, in 1165 was enough to sway the queen's resolution, who would go on for another 2 years blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. Which brings us to the fateful year of 1167. It opens with a certainly particular entry from Queen Aura's diary. Last night I had the most unusual dream. I dreamt I woke up in the middle of the night to some whispering and a flash of golden light. Then when I opened my eyes, I saw my daughter standing by my bedside, her eyes glowing with tears of resentment. But before I could do anything, she ran away. The rest I can't remember. It felt so real, almost like it actually happened. Months later, first royal advisor Arua died from what was initially thought to be food poisoning. However, a further autopsy by Lord Allen revealed the truth cause of death. Actual poison in her food, making her death a murder. With this realization, the kingdom was sent into a state of paranoia, concerned about the life of its beloved queen. Many theorizing Aura had been the intended target, and some even speculating it was done by Princess Estelina herself. An argument which Aura found ridiculous for refusing to believe that her own daughter could target her. Nevertheless, Aurora's death was what ultimately caused the event that Aura had been trying to prevent all along: Estelina's ascension to queen. The circumstances that led to it will be properly dealt with in her daughter's chapter. The information here relevant being that after signing her own abdication letter, Aura was forced to leave the butterfly kingdom with her husband, sister, and children, which some say was for the best, as it spared her from bearing witness to the years that were ahead. The information regarding Aura's last years is scarce, apart from being offered asylum in the Maple Kingdom, along with the rest of the royal family after wandering Mewni for a while. Not much else is known about the generous's adventures, endeavors succeeding her resigning the throne. Through some correspondence and testimonies, historians are able to piece together that she still occasionally volunteered and took part in charity events, albeit never with as much enthusiasm or passion as before. As Spruce notes in one of the only surviving letters to his sister Olive, although my wife's smile remains as warm and welcoming, her eyes tell a different story. Unfortunately, Aura was never fully able to recover from the heartbreak caused by Estelina's deception. She lived the rest of her days in constant decaying health, which was only worsened by the sporadic news that reached Maple Kingdom updating butterfly status in her absence. Some scholars speculate that Aura's refusal to stand by and do nothing as her people suffered was what led to the Maple Kingdom to send out some occasional donations in goodwill, moved by Aura's genuine care for her people. They were nonetheless always sent back by the Queen Estelina, which notes saying she didn't need her charity. Then came 1173, and the news that definitely shattered Aura's already broken heart: the existence of her granddaughter Hyperia, whose exact date of birth she didn't even know due to Butterfly's isolation from the other kingdoms, and Estelina's refusal to answer any of her letters. Not long after, the last queen of the Golden Ages let out her sad last breath, victim of a ruptured aorta. One of the most beloved names of history, Aura Butterfly's death was greatly mourned by all those whose lives she touched. Popular clamoring demanded her body be brought back to her home realm, which, despite Queen Estelina's reluctance, eventually happened, perhaps due to a drop of daughterly love left in her. Aura was buried in the crypts of Butterfly Castle, like all her former queens, reuniting with her mother after decades and taking with her all of the realm's hopes of a favorable future for years to come. 2 lives, 1 queen. Sorry for all the stuttering, but I was just trying to rush through this. I'm really tired. But next up is Estelina. And I really love Aura's biography. I love the fact that she's mute. I love Arua. I love Spruce. Everything was just perfect. Next up is Estelina, and I already hate her. So we'll just get into that biography really soon. That biography is super long, so it'll probably need to be cut into 2 or 3 parts. I just wanted this to make this a full parter because I wanted this to be like the last gift, the last full parter of the golden ages. Okay, see y'all with Estelina, the Star of Downfall.